Hola, muy buenas tardes tengan todos ustedes. Te saluda Judith Barriga con COT en español, que como cada 15 días o every other week estamos con Johnson and Nicholson contestando tus preguntas acerca de migración, tipos de tránsito, leyes y también casos familiares. Yo creo que fue hace casi 4 semanas que tuvimos la oportunidad de hablar con la abogada Nicholson acerca de cuáles son los derechos de un padre cuando no tiene papeles. ¿Qué tanto puede exigir un padre? Yo creo que nos aclaró muy bien nuestras dudas y les invito a que busquen este video que pues una advertencia está bilingüe. Hablamos back and forth, English and Spanish, en inglés y en español para seguir la conversación para toda la comunidad. Con esa conversación salió otra pregunta con alguna de las personas que vieron ese video. ¿Cuáles son los derechos de los padres? De hecho, la pregunta que me enviaron directamente fue ¿cuáles son los chances de que un papá pueda obtener la custodia de sus hijos? Entonces, hoy vamos a hablar un poquito acerca de cuáles son los derechos de un papá, o sea, un papá, hombre, el papá, en los casos de custodia y también un poquito acerca de child support, si realmente eso es lo que te da derecho. Good morning, Miss Elaine. How you doing?
Good morning. Good afternoon. It's afternoon here.
Good afternoon. Yes, sorry. Good afternoon. Yes. So I was just doing a quick introduction about the last conversation that we had, that we talk about the rights when parents do not have like immigration status in this country. And with that question, you know, other questions rise. And I think this is the most common one probably, like fathers, because no parents, but fathers. Does the father has any rights to the kids? Which ones are the odds for a father to get the custody of a child? You know, giving child support, it gives them some type of right or not. So if we could talk about that today, and I know that you suggested the topic, and I think it's great because, yeah, it's important for them to know, or it's us, the mothers, the ones that have all the power over the children. So we're going to talk about, because sometimes we feel like, you know, we are like, okay, this is my child, having in my womb, you know, I raised him, he's never home or whatever, and that's why I have the right of the child. So how do you want to start this topic?
So I guess the best place to start is by, you know, just reinforcing the fact that the law presumes that both parents have equal rights to the child. Every child has a mother and a father. So those rights go 50-50. Just because, like you mentioned, a woman's the mother, she, you know, the child gestated in her womb, it doesn't give her any superior rights to that child under the law.
Pues vamos a empezar a decir que los dos papás o los padres tienen el derecho, tienen el mismo derecho. Todo niño tiene una mamá y una papá, así que los derechos sobre este niño van 50-50. Yo le estaba comentando a la abogada que muchas veces las mamás creemos que tenemos el derecho completo sobre los niños porque pues nosotros los cargamos, nosotros los criamos, pero eso no nos da ningún derecho extra o más derechos sobre nuestros hijos.
Now, obviously, there are going to be factors that the court is going to consider in terms of determining which parent a child should spend time with, and you know what that would look like. Always, the court is going to make decisions based on what's best for the child. So, in a situation where, say, a father's been absent, he hasn't really had a relationship with the child. Well, I doubt that a court's going to see it as being a good idea to give that father full custody.
Dice que una de las cosas que considera un juez para tomar la decisión si el niño se queda con el papá o con la mamá es con quién ha pasado más tiempo este niño, con quién, cómo es su vida diaria. Si un padre ha estado ausente en la vida de un niño, va a ser muy difícil que el juez decida que se quede con él.
And then on the flip side of that, suppose there's a situation where mom and dad were in a relationship didn't work out, but they lived together as a family for a long time, and the child got accustomed to having a relationship with both parents. In a situation like that, I could see a court wanting to maintain that kind of a structure for the child so that child gets to spend as equal time with both parents, even though the parents may not be living together any longer.
Ahora, si el niño ha vivido en un núcleo familiar en donde el papá y la mamá todos los días de su vida habían estado involucrados o habían estado en una relación, es muy probable que el juez decida un tipo de custodia en donde los niños puedan seguir conviviendo con el papá y con la mamá en el mismo cantidad de tiempo, por ponerlo así, por ponerle un número.
So what I find a lot of times with fathers, when they call me about child custody issues, they'll tell me, you know, the child's mother's not letting me see the child. She controls everything. I have to give her money, or I have to just abide by her terms in order for me to be able to see my child. And I, you know, I don't like that. I want the court to be able to set a schedule so that I can see my child. I see those kinds of cases a lot. And when a father has difficulty establishing a meaningful relationship with the child because the mom is in the way, that's when that father needs to probably get the court involved.
Uno de los casos más comunes o las razones por las que padres o papás de familia le llaman a la abogada es porque usualmente la mamá no los deja ver al niño, trata de controlar la situación con el niño, les pide dinero para poder ver al niño. Entonces ahí es donde tiene que entrar un abogado para saber cuál es la forma más saludable para poder tener una relación con para poder seguir teniendo una relación con su hijo, ¿no? Es donde es. So what's usually, I don't know if I should interrupt you or just let you keep going, but what's the process? You know, what does the father, because you just mentioned like when a mother tried to say, give me money, no, estamos hablando acerca de, para las personas que se acaban de conectar, estamos hablando parte potestad de los papás, o cuándo tiene derecho un hombre a tener la custodia de su hijo, o cuáles son los derechos que tiene un padre sobre un hijo. So, la pregunta que le estoy haciendo ahorita a la abogada es realmente cuáles son las responsabilidades y los derechos, o cuál es el proceso para demostrar que tengo derecho a mi hijo. Do I have to demonstrate that I have the right to see my child? Do I have to give the custody, the child support, the money, the time? What's the process?
A father, and we're speaking about fathers today, so we're going to just kind of focus everything on the father as the one who's trying to gain his rights. He doesn't have to comply with unreasonable requests from the mother in order to see the child. In fact, it's the court really that needs to be setting whatever those guidelines are going to be. The mother doesn't have the right to say you have to do this, 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 and this before you can see your child. So that's something, again, when a mother is hanging different things over the father's head and making it difficult, a court needs to get involved to set the boundaries and to make those decisions about what are the terms going to be that would permit this father to be able to have visitation or, share custody of a child.
Importante lo que está diciendo la abogada y quizás repitiendo un poco la información que nos acaba de dar. Uno como madre o la persona que tiene el niño, y vamos a enfocarnos específicamente en los derechos de los papás, ¿ok? De los padres. La mamá no puede dictar qué es lo que ella quiere para que el padre pueda ver al niño. Si él se está poniendo en una situación muy difícil, hay que involucrar a la corte o involucrar a un abogado para que ellos determinen exactamente lo que se necesita hacer o lo que es justo para el niño. Now, para que pueda visitarlo, pueda verlo. This is very important because we're talking about the court will decide, right? What's the right thing for the child.
Right.
Not for the mother, know what the mother wants, know what the father wants. It's the child.
Right. And of course, court wants a child to be able to have a relationship with both parents. That's what's in the best interest of a child. Now, again, there are going to always be factors that a court has to consider. Just because a child has a mother and a father doesn't automatically mean that they get to, have free reign to have a relationship with this child. If there are issues involved, there could be substance abuse issues, alcoholism, bad behaviors, things like that. Well, the court's going to make, consider those things as well in determining what a custody or visitation arrangement should look like. So it's not just the good things about a parent that are going to be considered by the court, but it's any bad things that may harm the child. That's going to be very important for the court to consider in terms of making a decision about custody or visitation.
Estamos platicando con la abogada Nicholson, que se enfoca ahí en casos familiares que son custodia de niños, divorcio, manutención. Números de teléfono en pantalla: 704-457-5094, 704-457-5094. 3 oficinas tienen en Charlotte, Charleston, me va a decir Cara, ahorita se me olvidó la otra.
Pero, Charlotte and Charleston, that's pretty much.
457-5094. Si tienes alguna pregunta, Morganton, no sé por qué se me olvidó la de Morganton. Y ahí está también la página. Si tienes alguna pregunta acerca de este tema, estamos hablando custodia de los niños, o si tienes alguna pregunta acerca de divorcios, acerca de patria potestad o manutención, mándanoslos aquí en línea. Número de teléfono una vez más para una consulta gratis: 704-457-5094, 704-457-5094. La abogada nos acaba de explicar, hoy estamos hablando acerca del derecho de los papás, de los hombres, de los padres, que para que una corte tome la determinación de cuánto tiempo el niño debe pasar con el niño, no nada más se consideran las cosas buenas, como el dinero que le das, cuánto tiempo estuviste viviendo con él, qué tanto te necesita el niño, sino otras cosas. ¿Hubo algún tipo de problema de comportamiento estando en casa? Si hay drogas involucradas, abuso de sustancias o alcohol. Todo eso lo considera la corte para determinar si el niño o qué tipo de visitas debe tener el niño con el papá y también con la mamá, aunque no estamos enfocando al papá, pero también con la mamá. Entonces, es importante tomar en cuenta. You mentioned child support, and we keep mentioning that over and over again. Does that gives them the right to see them, or that's obligation?
Child support is an obligation. So, and child support and child custody, while of course they're interrelated because they involve this, can involve the same children, because a parent may not be paying child support, doesn't mean that the mother gets to withhold access to the child. So they're, the court's never going to say, well, you didn't pay any money toward care for your child, so you don't get to see the child. It doesn't work that way. But at the same time, if a parent is court ordered to pay child support, then they need to be in compliance with what the court has ordered. And again, it's not going to affect them on the child custody side of things, but they could be risking going to jail if they're not in compliance with what a court has ordered.
Estamos sobre custodia y manutención. Tienen que ver y están relacionados, sin embargo, una no determina la otra. Si tú no das child support o si tú no das manutención, no quiere decir que la mamá puede evitar que tú veas a tu hijo. Puedes ver a tu hijo. El no dar el child support, sin embargo, sí te puede causar otro tipo de problemas, como ir a la cárcel, por ejemplo. Entonces, no determina si puedes ver a tu hijo o no, y la cantidad que tienes que dar es lo que te dice. La mamá no puede decir cuánto da, es lo que te dice la corte, perdón. La mamá no te puede decir cuánto das, y si no la das, no ves a mi hijo. No. Now, like a mother can get in trouble if they are acting like you cannot see. I want to be drastic. Can they lose custody of their child or something like that?
If a mother is withholding access to the child, that's never going to look good in the eyes of the court, because again, the court wants moms and dads to have relationships. And so sometimes what can happen is, if say a mother has withheld access to the child for a long period of time, the court can kind of try to make up for that time by saying, all right, dad's going to get the child for 3 consecutive weeks, or do something drastic just to kind of bridge that gap, get the child back on track with kind of having a relationship with both parents. But courts have pretty broad powers to do what they think is best for a child. And obviously a mom who's been withholding access to the child is going to get a little bit of a warning from the court to not continue to do that. And in a worst case scenario, yes, the court could take that child and give custody to the father full time and say, Mom, you get to see your child on weekends, since you don't want to be fair about, dad having equal rights to, and equal access to the child.
Nuestro comportamiento como madres puede afectar la decisión de la corte, o nos puede meter en la corte si no estamos dejando que nuestro ex o el papá de los niños vea al niño. sí nos puede meter en problemas. Y de hecho ese comportamiento puede hacer que la corte tome decisiones drásticas, como si no dejamos que lo viera por un mes, dárselo al papá por 3 semanas, ¿no? O decir que nosotros no tenemos el comportamiento completo y entregarle completamente la custodia al papá. La corte tiene el poder de tomar la decisión que es mejor para nuestros hijos, así que tenemos que tener mucho cuidado de la manera en la que actuamos y nuestro comportamiento. Como dijo la abogada, el que nosotros evitemos que el padre no vea al niño, eso nos hace ver mal en frente de la corte. Así que, bueno, hay que, si no tienes una buena relación con él, tienes que tener involucrada a la corte. Now, so it's obvious, like, when these kind of problems emerge, it's because we don't have a good relationship with him. And we don't want to be in the same room, or we don't want to be in the same place, or we don't want him to come to our house, or, right? So how do the court handle this kind of things, or how can we handle this kind of things?
Well, what happens if there is a lot of bitterness between two parents, even in terms of just exchanging the child? Say there is a visitation or custody schedule, but dad says, I don't want to see her. I don't have anything to do with her. What will typically happen in cases like that is there would be a third party involved who would kind of help facilitate those exchanges. So there could be a cousin or somebody that both parents are familiar with and comfortable with, who would help exchange the child. So dad would park on one end of the parking lot, and mom's on the other end, and the cousin goes and gets the child and walks the child over to the other parent. I mean, it can get that necessary to have a third party involved, unfortunately, but that's most of the time what parents will do when they just don't want to have any interactions with each other.
Now, does the court can determine who is the right person to help do all this exchange?
It can. The court would obviously be open to recommendations, wanting to hear from both sides, because the court doesn't know who the parents know. So they're going to have to come up with recommendations. But at the very least, the court could say that there has to be a third party to help facilitate the exchange.
Entonces, ¿qué pasa cuando de plano no nos llevamos bien con nuestro ex y no podemos ni vernos esos 2 minutos en los que intercambiamos al niño porque explota una bomba? Pues lo que está diciendo la abogada, que la corte nos puede ayudar a determinar una tercera persona que nos puede ayudar a estos intercambios. Si cada vez que vemos a esta persona hay un tipo de conflicto, ¿no? Puede ser el primo, como ella estaba explicando. Hay veces que quizás el primo, el tío, lo que sea, tiene que esperar de un lado del estacionamiento o ayudar a llevar al niño de un lado al otro lado del estacionamiento para evitar un conflicto. So, todas esa clase de cosas se pueden arreglar. Now, before we talk about paternity test, to flip the coin and go to the other side, what are the usual arrangements that you have seen at court? What are the most common ones? Because although I know the classic one is I have my kids during the weekend, what are other options? Because I have heard fathers that said, I miss my child, in the middle of the week, like, I wish I could just go and have an ice cream with them.
So, again, it can be, it's the court has a lot of discretion. So it can be every other week. The kid spends 1 week with mom, 1 week with dad. Sometimes one parent only gets time on the weekends. And everything in between. So something like what you just explained, a lot of times the parents will say it's a father who only gets to see his child on the weekends. He may also get to spend, say, one evening with the child. So he can pick up the child for dinner, say, every Wednesday, and spend 3 or 4 hours after school. So it's a lot of different options that are available, just depending on what's obviously first and foremost what's best for the child. And then looking at both parents' schedules, the younger the child, the more you want to kind of keep things as you always want consistency, but it's more difficult, say, for a 2-year-old to understand a lot of back and forth than for a 12-year-old. So another factor the court is going to consider is the age of the child, the maturity of the child, to try to decide what works best. You want to limit a whole lot of back and forth with younger children just because they can't process that. Older children, on the other hand, are more able to handle, say, an alternating weekly schedule. So again, it's always going to be driven by the particular circumstances involving that family. So there's not a one size fits all anytime you're dealing with child custody.
Le preguntaba yo a la abogada, ¿cuáles son los tipos de acomodaciones que ella ha visto con esta cláusula de las custodias? Nosotros escuchamos siempre, el fin de semana los tiene papá, durante la semana los tiene mamá. Y dice que en realidad hay muchos tipos de custodia, que no existe un tipo de custodia para todos. Según la dinámica que tenía la familia es como se deciden las custodias o se determinan las custodias y también la edad del niño, porque no es lo mismo un niño de 12 años que puede entender por qué el ir y venir a un niño de 2 años. Entonces, esos dos factores, la edad y cómo era la dinámica de la familia antes, es lo que va a determinar cómo es la custodia, ¿no? Quizás un niño más grande, el papá lo puede recoger de repente entre semana, llevarlo a cenar y regresarlo a su casa, mientras un niño a lo mejor de 2 años no va a entender por qué su papá lo está recogiendo, lo está llevando y le está trayendo. Entonces, es importante, todas estas cosas es lo que toma determinación la corte y no existe una forma específica. Hay en algunos casos en donde el niño se queda una semana con uno, otra semana con otro, o un fin de semana con uno, o entre semana se va con el papá. Así que hay diferentes tipos de casos. Y eso de la edad es bien importante lo que dijo. So, conforme tu hijo también vaya cambiando de edad, van cambiando los tipos de custodia. Así se puede ver. So this custody arrangement, you just said something about age, you know, family dynamics and things. So as my kids grows up, the dynamic can change, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So, typically if when a court is deciding permanent child custody, it's meant to be just that, permanent. So even if, the child is, say, 5 years old and we're going to court for permanent custody, that order is in theory going to remain in place until the child turns 18. But obviously we know our lives change, children's needs and wants change. And so anytime a court enters an order, there are opportunities when the court may have to make some modifications and some changes to those orders. So it could be, the child's life changes. When they were 2 or 5, they weren't involved in a bunch of extracurricular activities. Now they're older, they don't have the same time to, be bouncing around between parents. So age is going to be a factor for a number of reasons. And then the older the child gets, at some point, a child is going to be able to dictate what they want, right? What they want a custody or visitation arrangement to look like. So age is always a factor. And at some point, as children get older, they will have the opportunity to weigh in make some decisions or at least suggestions as to how they would like to spend their time with their parents.
Custodia permanente es una palabra que acaba de usar la abogada. Eso existe y eso es algo que determina en la corte hasta que el niño cumple 18 años. Sin embargo, conforme el niño va creciendo, pueden cambiar las cosas, el horario del niño, la necesidad del niño. Quizás en cuanto más crezcan, tienen actividades después de la escuela, otro tipo de cosas que pues va a cambiar la dinámica y la interacción que tengan con los padres de familia. Así que mientras dice permanente, no quiere decir que no pueda cambiar. Y también va a llegar una edad en donde los niños van a poder no dictar ni ordenar, pero sí opinar qué es lo que quieren. Si quieren vivir con un padre, quieren vivir con el otro, o qué es lo que ellos quieren hacer. We're not going to talk about this topic today, but with what you just mentioned, perhaps one day we can talk about emancipation. And I don't know if it's something that you also do and how actually works, because some of us think that it's just when my child moves out and that's it. Pero quizás un tema que podemos hablar con esto sería la emancipación, que es cuando nuestros hijos que aún no son mayores de edad se mudan o se van de la casa. Pero ese es un tema para otro día. So we're almost running out of time. So I want to.
I just want to continue. I know we want to talk about paternity, and let's save that for another day because there are a few other things I wanted to.
Let's go
on the order of custody. One thing is I find sometimes when a father or sometimes mothers come to me and say, well, I don't want my child visiting the father because I don't want him around the child around the new girlfriend or this person.
Oh, that's it. Yes, let's talk about that.
And so, I need to mention that, again, children have mothers and fathers, and one parent doesn't get to dictate who that child has a relationship on the other side of the equation. As long as, people that father is involved with are safe, are appropriate to be around the child, the court's not going to say to the father, well, you can't let the child be around your girlfriend, your mother, or your, best friend. It's just not going to happen. The court is going to always trust the parent's judgment to decide who is a safe person for that child to be around. And so neither parent gets to dictate who the child has a relationship with on the other side of the equation. And it's important to say that because I see that all the time. Like, I don't want my child around so-and-so. Well,
and
you know what?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that question because I was thinking about it, but my mother was on my ear, and society, I want to say, and it's like, okay, this is not a topic that you should be talking about right now, because it's something that we try to, it's true. We discuss it and we fight with our partner or ex-partner or whatever, and we don't talk about it. And it's something that it needs to be talked about it. So, la abogada acaba de tocar un tema que con la vergüenza voy a decir que siento que a veces es un tabú en nuestra comunidad y en muchas otras comunidades. Y mientras pensé hacer la pregunta, la estaba evitando. ¿Qué pasa cuando de repente tú como mujer o como hombre dices, ¿sabes qué? Yo no quiero que mi hijo esté alrededor de tu novia o de tu nueva pareja, o no me interesa, o eso? Esta es una decisión que está completamente al judgment, se me fue la palabra en español, o juzgar, o que tiene que determinar el papá o la mamá que tiene. Tú sabes qué personas deben de estar alrededor de tus hijos, si son buena influencia o no son buena influencia, si son buenas personas o no son buenas personas. Esta es una decisión que la corte no te va a ayudar a determinar si puede estar alrededor de tu, y dije novia, ¿no? O la pareja de tu ex, pero mamá, papá, mejor amigo, amigos o lo que sea. Tú como papá tienes que saber cuál es el ambiente y las personas que pueden estar alrededor de tus hijos, y la otra pareja o la otra persona no puede decidirlo. No puede decirlo. So, and with this means that she can say that, oh, if you continue seeing her or you continue seeing him, you won't be able to see your child. No.
Not if it goes to court. Obviously, outside of court involvement, that happens all the time. But once the court gets involved, that's not going to happen. If you're not, a parent's not going to be able to use that to control access to the child.
So we shouldn't, because some parents get afraid. They are like, okay, and I don't want problems with him, or I don't want problems with her. Let me just take my kids to my mom's house, or somewhere else instead of being in my house. But it shouldn't be like that.
Right. And so, and two things on that issue. Again, if, dad has custody or visitation with the child and he decides he wants his mom to babysit, like, again, biological mom can't get involved and say, no, the child is only supposed to spend time with you, not with your mother, not with your children. Have full family members on both sides of the equation. And so if dad decides that he wants to let his sister or his mother or someone on his side babysit or, use up some of his parenting time, that is his right.
El derecho de un papá, y recuerden, no estamos hablando de los papás, el derecho de un papá es que no importa qué es lo que te diga tu ex, mientras tú tengas a tu hijo, tú tienes completa decisión y control de con quién tu hijo pasa el tiempo. Tú tienes toda una familia, tíos, abuelas, primos, de todo. Entonces tú decides quién cuida al niño, quién te hace babysit y de repente con quién pasa el niño, a dónde va el niño, mientras él esté contigo. La mamá, la ex no te puede venir y decir, el niño tiene que pasar todo el tiempo contigo, por eso te lo estás llevando para pasar con él. No, tú tienes el control de cómo se pasa el niño con el tiempo. Of course, the best thing is that you spend actual time with your child, right? You don't want the child to be all the time at grandma's house.
Exactly, and you're right, but it so it doesn't mean dad gets the child every time and drops him off and just picks him up on Sunday and takes him back to the child.
Yeah, but you can decide. The mother cannot tell you like you're not taking the child next weekend because every time you take him, it goes to your grandmother.
Right.
That used to be my childhood, though. They mentioned that, and I have the best weekends ever with my grandma. But every kid, I prefer to spend it with my grandma than with my father. But it's another story,
yes,
right?
Another story for another day, right?
Yeah.
I think lastly, what's important to know: the worst thing a parent in a situation like this can do is to do nothing. Because the longer a father, for example, waits, the worse it's going to be, because now that's more time he's not spending with his child, right? And so now he's waited a year or 2 years. Now he finally decides, all right, I need to go to court on this. Now he's got 2 years. The judge is going to say, well, what happened? You didn't do anything for 2 years. So don't wait. By all means, if a parent is withholding access to a child, the other parent needs to do something right away, because the more time that passes, the harder it's going to be to kind of get things back on track. So do something. Talk to an attorney, but don't just sit back and just wait.
El consejo de la abogada es, si tú tienes esta clase de problemas, busca ayuda profesional inmediatamente. No te esperes a que las cosas pasen peor, a que pase 1 año, a que pase 2 años, porque ¿qué es lo que va a pasar? De repente va a el juez va a preguntar, ¿por qué has tomado tanto tiempo para tomar esa decisión de venir y sentarte aquí y pedir los derechos como padre, ¿no? Entre más tiempo tardes en pedir tus derechos o exigir tus derechos, menos tiempo vas a pasar con tu hijo. Así que no esperen tanto tiempo, vayan y busquen ayuda, acérquense a la corte o con un abogado, y allí están los números de teléfono 704-457-5094. Hoy estamos platicando en inglés con la abogada Elaine, pero tienen personal que habla en español y les ayuda a traducir, así que 704-457-5094 es el número de teléfono. Now, before we go, they say that you should not fix whatever is now broken. If I have a good relationship or whatever, but we are afraid that some days will change, would you recommend to go to court and get a official, custody arrangement?
It depends. I mean, it's hard to say if, I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's always better to have something in writing in case things do go left, right? Today they're going well and we're getting along fine, but you don't know what the future holds. And even if parties are getting along and things are well, to get a court order is not very complicated and doesn't even always involve having to go to court. So I think it's worthwhile getting a court order, especially because you can obtain one fairly easily without even having to actually go to court and appear before a judge.
Antes de irnos, le preguntaba a la abogada, dicen que uno no debe de arreglar lo que no está descompuesto. Recomienda a ella que, a pesar de que me llevo yo bien con mi expareja, pida una orden oficial de custodia. Y lo que ella dijo es verdad, quizás sea un poco difícil, pero se debería o se puede hacer. Nada más en caso de que las cosas de repente se vayan por otro lado o no funcionen tan bien como están funcionando, por lo menos tienes una orden de la corte o algo por escrito. Súper importante. Well, Ms. Nicholson, Ms. Elaine, thank you very much for talking to us today. Definitely, we need to talk about emancipation and paternity test. But these are topics that we need to talk about in our community. We usually don't talk about, and remember, quiero recordarles a todos que la última vez que platicamos con la abogada Nicholson, hablamos acerca de nuestros derechos como padres cuando no tenemos un estatus legal en Estados Unidos. Así que les voy a invitar que le den scroll down o que busquen ese video, porque también fue muy interesante. Y hoy hablamos de los derechos de los papás, que sí tienen derechos. Den o no den manutención, que no estamos dando más los consejos, pero tienen derechos. Así que los invito a que vean este video. Thank you very much. Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you.
Que tengan un buen fin de semana a todos. Bye.